The classroom on Space Station Viridian 7 was a perfect circle of cold metal and soft blue light. 47 students sat at individual workstations, each one representing a different species from the Galactic Union. The assignment, projected in floating text above the central dais, was simple: build a weapon. Any weapon. You have 6 standard hours. Instructor Thrax, a 6-limbed reptilian from the Draxan hierarchy, clicked his mandibles with satisfaction. He had taught this class interspecies conflict resolution through applied engineering for 19 cycles. Every year, he gave the same challenge. Every year, the results taught him something new about the young minds of the galaxy. The students began immediately. A young Vorkesh, all 4 arms moving at once, started welding plasma conduits onto a carbon fiber frame. 2 Relians worked together, their translucent bodies glowing as they grew crystalline shards from their own organic matter, sharp, beautiful, and toxic. A hulking brute named Gornik simply picked up his metal stool, ripped off 2 legs, and began hammering one end flat against the floor. Simple, effective, predictable. Thrax's attention kept drifting to the back corner. Seat 47. The human. Her name was Alara Vance, 17 years old. The only human in the class, and one of only 3 mammals. She had arrived 6 months ago from a frontier colony called Dustfall, a name that told Thrax everything he needed to know. Humans were tough, yes, resilient, but they were also young to the galactic stage, barely 50 years past their first FTL flight. Most species viewed them as eager but primitive, useful as laborers or soldiers, not as thinkers. Alara had not touched the box of alloys, power cells, or synthetics provided at her station. Instead, she had pulled something from her own bag, a long, curved object wrapped in worn cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, almost reverently. It was a bone. Thrax tilted his head, his inner eyelids blinking sideways. The bone was roughly the length of her forearm, pale yellow with age, and clearly from some large animal. He could see saw marks near the joints, old ones, weathered. This was not fresh. This had been saved. Carried across space. Elara set the bone on her workstation. Then she took out a simple steel file, not a sonic tool, not a molecular edger, just a manual file with a wooden handle, and began to work. She did not rush. Her strokes were long, steady, and precise. The soft scrape of metal on old bone was the only sound in the room that did not hum or whine with technology. Other students glanced at her, then away. A human playing with a dead thing. How quaint. Thrax circled closer, careful not to disturb her focus. He had seen humans make tools from bone before in historical archives, pre-industrial, pre-electricity, before they even had written language. But here, in a class designed to test the limits of engineering, it seemed almost like an insult. Still, he said nothing. The rules were clear. Build a weapon. They did not specify materials or methods. R1 passed. The Vorkesh had assembled a working plasma rifle, though it overheated every 30 seconds. The Relians had grown a dozen crystal daggers, each one capable of delivering a neurotoxin that would drop a full-grown Draxan in under a minute. Gornik had created a brutal mace from his stool legs and some spare wiring. Others had built lasers, projectile launchers, sonic emitters, even a small grenade. Alara kept filing. The bone was taking shape, a curve here, a taper there. She tested the edge with her thumb, drew a bead of blood, and smiled. Then she turned the bone over and began working on the other side. Thrax noticed something strange. The other students, even the most confident ones, kept checking their work against theoretical models. They ran diagnostics. They recalculated. They second-guessed. Alara did none of that. She worked like someone who had done this 100 times before. Her hands knew what to do. Her eyes never wavered. By R3, the room had grown tense. Not because of conflict. Thrax had strict rules about testing weapons on living targets, but because of frustration. The Vorkesh's plasma rifle had melted its own trigger assembly. Twice, the Relian's crystal daggers were beautiful but brittle. One had already snapped when dropped. Gornik's mace was heavy enough to break bones, but he could barely lift it with one hand, and his species relied on speed. Alara, meanwhile, had moved from filing to polishing. She had produced a small stone from her pocket, smooth, dark, river-worn, and was running it along the bone's edge, creating a finish that gleamed under the blue lights. The bone now looked like ivory. It was curved like a question mark, with a pointed tip and a handle-shaped base wrapped in thin leather cord she had braided herself. Thrax checked the station inventory. She had used nothing from the provided materials except the leather, which was standard repair cord. Everything else, the bone, the file, the stone, was her own. He made a note on his datapad. Asterisk Subject 47. Non-standard approach. Possible cultural artifact. Monitor closely. Asterisk R4. The Vorkash gave up on the plasma rifle and started building a railgun instead. The Relians had regrown their daggers into a single long sword, but it was weeping toxic sap onto the floor. Gornik had added spikes to his mace. A Xylan student had constructed a sound cannon that made everyone's teeth hurt. Aquilian had grown a living projectile weapon from her own symbiotic fungus. It pulsed and breathed and looked deeply unsettling. Alara was now testing the bone's balance. She held it loosely in her right hand, flipping it end over end, catching it, flipping it again. Then she stood up. This was the first time she had left her chair in 4 hours. She walked to an empty section of the work floor, away from the others. Thrax watched, his claws tapping silently on the dais. She raised the bone weapon. It was clearly a knife now, but with a longer curve than most, almost like a small sickle, and began to move. She did not attack the air wildly. She moved in patterns. Slow at first, then faster. The bone blade cut arcs of light under the fluorescence. She stepped, turned, slashed, stabbed, blocked. Her breathing stayed even. Her eyes tracked imaginary enemies from all directions. She moved like water pouring downhill, inevitable, smooth, and utterly without wasted motion. Thrax realized he had stopped breathing. He had seen combat forms from 100 species. He had studied martial traditions across the galaxy. But this human girl moved with a fluency that spoke of muscle memory so deep it was beyond thought. This was not a student playing at weapons. This was someone who had been taught by people who had used such tools to survive. He checked her file again. Asterisk Dustfall Colony. Population, 12,000. Primary industry, deep core mining. Secondary, agriculture. Threat level, moderate. Native fauna, territorial, asterisk native fauna. That explained the bone, R5. The other students had finished their weapons. The Vorkesh's railgun worked, but it required an external power pack the size of a small child. The Relian's crystal sword was displayed on a stand because it was too dangerous to hold for more than a few seconds. Gornik's mace sat on the floor. He had decided it was too heavy to be practical. The Xylan sound cannon had been disqualified after it accidentally shattered a viewing window. The Quillian's living projectile had eaten its own launch mechanism. Thrax gathered them all in the center of the room. 47 students, 47 weapons. Some impressive, most flawed. All technologically sophisticated except one. You have 6 hours, Thrax said, his voice echoing through the chamber. Now you will demonstrate your weapons in a controlled environment. You will explain your design choices. You will discuss materials, energy sources, and intended tactical applications. Then you will face a standard military-grade combat drone. Level 3. The students shifted nervously. Level 3 drones were fast, armored, and equipped with non-lethal countermeasures. They were designed to test the limits of field equipment. Who wishes to go first? The Vorkesh stepped forward, railgun in hand. His name was Krell. He was proud, loud, and confident. I will demonstrate the superiority of directed kinetic energy. The drone dropped from a ceiling panel, a sleek, black sphere covered in sensors and articulated arms. It hovered at chest height, silent and patient. Krell raised his railgun. The power pack whined. He aimed, fired. The projectile, a small tungsten slug accelerated to near hypersonic speed, struck the drone dead center. The impact created a shock wave that threw several students off their feet. Thrax's hearing membranes flattened against his skull. When the smoke cleared, the drone was still hovering. Its armor had a dent the size of a fist. Nothing more. Krell stared. That's impossible. That slug would penetrate 10 centimeters of steel. Thrax walked to the drone and tapped the dent. Military-grade armor, Krell, designed to distribute kinetic energy across the entire surface. Your weapon delivers tremendous force, but over too small an area. The armor disperses it. Good against soft targets. Useless against hardened military assets. Krell's for shoulders slumped. The Relians went next. Their crystal sword was beautiful, and when one of them touched the edge to the drone's hull, the neurotoxin actually began to eat through the outer layer. But the toxin also made the crystal brittle. After 3 seconds, the sword snapped in half. The Relians stood in silence, holding their broken creation. Gornik tried to swing his mace. He managed one awkward arc before the weight pulled him off balance. The drone easily sidestepped. Gornik fell flat on his back. The mace landed on his own foot. He did not cry out, but his eyes watered. One by one, the students failed. The Xylan's rebuilt sound cannon made the drone wobble, but not fall. The Quillian's second living projectile latched onto the drone and began trying to mate with it, which was effective at disabling the sensors, but deeply uncomfortable for everyone watching. A small avian student had built a laser pointer, so powerful it could start fires. But the drone's reflective coating sent the beam back into the ceiling, melting a hole through 3 decks before emergency systems kicked in. Thrax noted each failure with clinical detachment. This was the point of the exercise, to show that building a weapon and building an effective weapon were two different things. The students were learning. That was good, but one student had not yet presented. Elara Vance, Thrax called. "Human, present your weapon." The room grew quiet. Elara stepped forward, the bone knife held loosely at her side. She looked small compared to the others. Humans were medium-sized at best, but her posture was different. The Vorkesh had been eager. The Relians had been artistic. Gornik had been brute force. Elara was none of those things. She looked calm. Not confident in a loud way, but in a settled way. Like someone who had already accepted the outcome, whatever it might be. "This is a bone knife," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. The bone comes from a dustfall razorback, a large herbivore with dense skeletal structure. It was harvested 3 years ago, dried for 6 months, then stored in low humidity conditions. I filed it to shape by hand over the last 5 hours. The edge is polished to a microscopic level using a river stone. The handle is wrapped in standard repair cord for grip. Thrax nodded. Materials and method. Now intended tactical application. Elara looked at the drone. It hovered, silent and waiting. It's not a ranged weapon. It's not an energy weapon. It's not explosive. It's a blade. Close combat only. But it's also not meant to fight armor. Then what is it meant to fight? She smiled slightly. Everything that isn't armor. Thrax's inner eyelids blinked. Explain, military-grade armor stops bullets, plasma, lasers, and explosives because those things hit from the outside and try to force their way in. Armor is designed to resist pressure, but a sharp blade doesn't rely on pressure alone. It relies on edge geometry and motion. A blade doesn't push through armor, it finds the gaps, joints, seals, vents, visors, and if there are no gaps, it doesn't try to cut the armor. It cuts what's underneath. She stepped closer to the drone. The drone sensors tracked her. Its articulated arms extended slightly, ready to defend. "May I demonstrate?" Elara asked. Thrax hesitated. Level 3 drones were expensive, but Curiosity won. "Proceed." "The drone is set to non-lethal response only." Elara nodded. She did not charge. She did not leap. She walked forward at a normal pace, as if approaching a friend. The drone raised one arm to strike a simple blunt force swing meant to knock her back. She moved. It was not fast in the way a Vorkesh was fast, all flailing limbs and adrenaline. It was fast in the way a thought was fast. One moment she was walking. The next, she was inside the drone's guard. Her left hand gripping one of its sensor arms. Her right hand bringing the bone blade up in a tight, economical arc. The blade slipped into the seam between 2 armor plates near the drone's primary power coupling. Not a cut, a probe. She twisted the blade slightly, and the drone's lights flickered. Then she pulled the blade out and stepped back. The drone hovered for 3 more seconds. Then its systems died, and it dropped to the floor with a hollow clang. Silence. Thrax walked to the drone and examined the scene. The bone blade had not penetrated the armor. It had not even damaged the plates. But it had found a gap no wider than a human fingernail, slipped inside, and severed a single control wire. That wire was not armored. It was not even protected. Because no one had ever thought someone would try to cut it with a sharpened bone, he looked up at Elara. "How did you know where to cut?" She shrugged. "All military drones have the same basic layout. Power coupling near the center mass. Control wires bundled together. If you cut the right one, the whole thing shuts down. It's in the user manual. You read the user manual for a combat drone." "I read all the manuals." "It's a quiet colony." The other students stared. Some looked impressed. Most looked confused. They had built weapons that could destroy buildings, melt steel, or vaporize flesh. She had built a knife from an old bone and used it to defeat a military-grade drone in 3 seconds. Her weapon had no power source, no moving parts, no ammunition. It could not jam, overheat, or run out of battery. It was silent. It was invisible to most sensors. And it was made from something so primitive that no security system in the galaxy was designed to detect it. Thrax straightened his spine, a gesture of respect among his people. Your weapon is effective. Explain your design philosophy. Alara turned the bone knife over in her hands. The blade gleamed. The assignment was to build a weapon. It didn't say it had to be advanced. It didn't say it had to be powerful. It just said weapon. A weapon is anything that lets you win a fight you would otherwise lose. Technology is great, but technology can be taken away. It can be jammed, hacked, or broken. A sharp bone is just a sharp bone. It doesn't need charging. It doesn't need updates. It doesn't need permission. She looked around the room at the other students, at their broken railguns, their shattered crystals, their useless maces. You all built weapons that need factories and supply chains and technicians. I built a weapon that needs nothing but my own hand. That's not primitive. That's sustainable. The room was very quiet. Xylan raised a trembling limb. But the bone knife cannot defeat a starship, or a tank, or even a properly armored soldier. Alara nodded. You're right. But it doesn't have to. It just has to defeat the person inside the starship. The person driving the tank. The soldier wearing the armor. And those people, no matter what species, have soft spots, joints, necks, eyes, the gaps between their protection. Every weapon system has a vulnerability. Every soldier has a moment of distraction. The bone knife is not about overwhelming force. It's about finding the one place where force doesn't matter. Thrax made a final note on his datapad. He wrote, *subject 47, human, grade, exceptional. Note to curriculum committee. Add section on low technology countermeasures. The galaxy's most advanced militaries have forgotten that war is not won by machines. It is won by the creatures inside them. And creatures can be cut. He dismissed the class. The students filed out, chattering among themselves. Some argued that Alara had cheated by exploiting a design flaw. Others said she had simply been smarter. Most were already thinking about how to build their own low-tech weapons just in case. Alara stayed behind for a moment, wrapping the bone knife in its cloth. Thrax approached her. That bone, he said. It was not from a razorback. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. I have studied human colonial records, Thrax continued. Dustfall's razorbacks are large, yes, but their bones are hollow, flight-adapted. Yours is dense, heavy. It came from a ground-dwelling creature. Alara was silent for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, there were no razorbacks on Dustfall when my grandparents landed. There were only the things that hunted them. She tucked the wrapped knife into her bag. The bone is from my great-grandmother's last kill. She used the same file, the same stone. She taught my grandmother. My grandmother taught my mother. My mother taught me. The weapon changes hands, but the knowledge doesn't. Thrax felt a cold ripple run down his spine. What hunted your grandparents? Alara shouldered her bag. We called them stalkers. 6 legs, armored hide, smart to smart. They didn't build weapons because they didn't need to. Their claws could tear through mining equipment. Their teeth could bite through steel. The colony almost died 3 times before we figured out how to fight them. And how was that? She smiled a thin, hard smile that did not reach her eyes. We learned where their armor had gaps. Under the joints. Behind the jaw. Inside the mouth, if you were fast enough. And we learned that a sharp piece of their own data bone from a stalker killed in the last attack could slip into those gaps better than any metal blade. Because the bone remembered what it was. The stalkers didn't fear metal. They feared the bones of their own kind. She walked toward the door. Then she stopped and looked back. You asked us to build weapons, instructor. I built a weapon that has been killing monsters for 4 generations. That's not primitive. That's evolved. She left. Thrax stood alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by the wreckage of plasma rifles and crystal swords and all the other failed wonders of galactic engineering. On the floor, the disabled drone lay in a heap. He knelt beside it and examined the seam where the bone blade had entered. The cut was so precise, so clean that he could barely see it with his naked eye. He thought about the human species.